He thought the girl sleeping in his private elevator was just another homeless stranger hiding from the Seoul rain, until he noticed she had cleaned the marble floor before falling asleep on it. At 2:13 a.m., Kwon Tae-suk stepped out of the black Maybach beneath the towering glass penthouse building in Hanam-dong, the cold February wind sweeping across the empty streets like a warning whispered through steel. The city glittered behind him, silver lights reflecting against the Han River while his security team moved in practiced silence around him. Men feared Tae-suk across half of Seoul. Some called him a businessman. Others used quieter words when his name came up in expensive restaurants and private clubs. But tonight, none of that mattered, because the moment the private elevator doors slid open on the 47th floor, he stopped walking. A woman was asleep inside his elevator. She couldn't have been older than her late 20s. Dark skin. Thin frame curled tightly against the mirrored wall. One worn backpack tucked beneath her head like she expected someone might steal it if she let go. Her sneakers were soaked from rainwater, sitting neatly beside her feet instead of dirtying the cream-colored marble. Even asleep, she looked careful. Like someone trying not to inconvenience the world. One of the bodyguards stepped forward instantly. "Sir, we'll remove her." Tae-suk lifted one hand. The man froze mid-step. Silence settled over the elevator except for the soft mechanical hum above them. Tae-suk's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a small cleaning rag folded beside the girl's hand. At first, he didn't understand why. Then he saw the faint streaks of moisture on the marble floor around her. She had wiped away the footprints she tracked in from the rain before falling asleep. Something about that bothered him more than if she'd stolen from him. The girl shifted suddenly, startled awake by the sound of expensive leather shoes against marble. Her eyes opened wide in panic. For one disoriented second, she looked ready to run. Then reality crashed over her face. "I'm sorry," she blurted immediately, scrambling to sit up. Her voice carried a soft American accent beneath exhaustion. "I'm so sorry. I cleaned the floor. I didn't touch anything. I swear." Tae-suk said nothing. Most people froze when they recognized him. Even before they knew his name, they felt the weight of him. 6'3". Black wool coat tailored perfectly across broad shoulders. Dark eyes cold enough to make trained men lower their gaze. But this woman didn't look at him like he was dangerous. She looked at him like he was someone she desperately hoped wouldn't send her back outside. One of the guards frowned. "You can't stay here." The girl nodded quickly, already reaching for her shoes with trembling fingers. I know. I was just warming up for a little while." Her hands shook badly from the cold as she tried tying the laces. Tae-suk noticed the redness around her knuckles. Cracked skin. Fresh cuts. Working hands. Not lazy hands. The kind that cleaned hotel bathrooms and carried heavy boxes until the body stopped complaining because survival cost too much energy already. "Why this building?" Tae-suk finally asked. His voice was low, controlled, impossible to read. The girl hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the wet shoelace. Then quietly, almost embarrassed, she answered, "Because the cameras make it safer." The entire hallway went still. Even the guards exchanged brief glances without speaking. But Tae-suk kept staring at her. At the soaked sleeves she'd carefully folded inward so they wouldn't drip onto the marble. At the way she apologized for existing before anyone asked her to. And for reasons he didn't fully understand yet, Kwon Tae-suk suddenly found himself unable to walk away. The rain outside intensified, soft drops turning into violent sheets against the glass walls of the penthouse tower while Imani struggled to force her wet sneakers back onto numb feet. She kept her eyes lowered, shoulders tight, moving with the careful urgency of someone used to leaving before people changed their minds. Tae-suk watched her silently from the elevator entrance. Most people begged when cornered. Some lied. Others grew angry out of shame. But this woman only looked embarrassed for taking up space in a place she clearly believed she did not belong. "You slept here alone?" he asked. Imani nodded without looking up. Just tonight. The answer came too quickly. Even exhausted, she still tried protecting her dignity. One of the guards pressed the button to hold the elevator doors open. "Sir, I can call building security downstairs." Tae-suk did not turn toward him. "No police." His tone remained calm, but the entire hallway immediately fell silent again. The guards exchanged glances. Nobody questioned him twice. Imani finally risked a small glance upward, confusion flickering across her tired face. She clearly expected anger. Maybe humiliation. Instead, the man standing before her looked almost thoughtful, dark eyes fixed on the soaked sleeves hanging past her hands. The silence stretched long enough for the elevator motor to hum softly beneath them. Then Tae-suk stepped inside. The movement alone made Imani instinctively shift backward against the mirrored wall. He noticed that too. Fear trained into muscle memory. "What is your name?" he asked. "Imani Bellamy." Her voice sounded rough from cold and exhaustion. "American?" "Chicago." For the first time, something almost unnoticeable shifted in Tae-suk's expression. "You are far from home." Imani gave a weak nod. "Yes, sir." "Sir." The word lingered strangely in the expensive elevator. Tae-suk glanced down and noticed her backpack zipper had broken. Several folded papers stuck awkwardly from the opening. Job applications. Transit receipts. A small English-Korean phrasebook with worn edges. She followed his gaze and quickly pulled the bag closer to her chest, embarrassed. "I was leaving," she said quietly. "I just needed somewhere warm for a little while." Outside, thunder rolled low across the skyline. The lights flickered once overhead before stabilizing again. Imani flinched automatically at the sound. Small movement. Almost invisible. But Tae-suk caught it. He had spent too many years reading fear in other people not to notice. "When did you last eat?" he asked. Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard by the question. "I am okay." "That was not my question." Another silence. Then quietly, "Yesterday morning." One of the guards muttered something under his breath in Korean. Tae-suk ignored him. Instead, he studied the woman standing barefoot in his elevator at 2 in the morning wearing a jacket too thin for winter temperatures that had dropped below freezing. Yet somehow she still carried herself with restraint instead of desperation. No begging. No dramatic story. Just exhaustion wrapped tightly around pride. Finally Tae-suk reached into the inside pocket of his coat and handed her a small black access card. Imani stared at it without moving. "Sir?" "Staff floor. 29th level." Even the guards looked surprised now. Tae-suk continued before anyone could speak. 1 week. Imani blinked rapidly like she thought she misunderstood his English. "You are letting me stay here?" "Temporary." His voice remained cool, controlled. But then his eyes lowered briefly toward the damp cloth still folded beside where she had slept. "You cleaned my elevator before sleeping in it." The words landed harder than kindness somehow. Imani swallowed carefully, fingers tightening around the access card he had given her. "I did not want to leave a mess." Tae-suk stared at her for one long second beneath the soft gold elevator lights. Then quietly, almost to himself, he said, "That is exactly why I am letting you stay." Imani had not slept in a real bed in almost 11 days, but somehow the small staff room on the 29th floor felt harder to trust than the freezing subway benches she had grown used to. She stood frozen just inside the doorway while one of the female house staff placed folded towels onto the edge of the bed without speaking. The room itself was simple compared to the rest of the building, but to Imani it looked unreal. Soft lighting. Heated floors. Clean cream-colored sheets without stains or cigarette burns. A small window overlooking the glowing Seoul skyline. She kept waiting for someone to tell her there had been a mistake. "You can shower," the older woman said gently before leaving. "Kitchen opens at 6. Then the door clicked shut. Silence wrapped around the room immediately. Imani stared at the bed for several long seconds before carefully setting her backpack on the floor beside it. Even now, she avoided placing it on the furniture. Habit. She moved slowly toward the bathroom mirror and almost did not recognize herself under the soft overhead lights. Rainwater had dried against her dark curls in uneven waves. Exhaustion sat beneath her eyes like bruises carved from sleepless nights. Her jacket sleeves were frayed near the wrists where threads had begun unraveling. She looked exactly like what she had spent months trying not to become. Disposable. The hot water made her hands shake the moment it touched her skin. For several seconds she simply stood there beneath the steam with her eyes closed while warmth returned painfully to her fingers. She had forgotten what safety felt like. Not comfort. Not happiness. Just safety. And somehow that frightened her more. Because safety could disappear overnight. It already had once. 3 months earlier, Imani Bellamy had still believed hard work protected people. She cleaned luxury hotel suites near Itaewon 12 hours a day while studying Korean phrases at night from a second-hand workbook she bought at a subway market. The agency promised steady pay, legal housing, and visa sponsorship after 6 months. Instead, they delayed her checks repeatedly. Then came excuses about paperwork. New contracts. Missing documents. Every conversation ended with someone telling her to wait a little longer. She waited until the landlord locked her out of the apartment the agency provided. Waited until her savings disappeared buying convenience store meals and train fare to job interviews that led nowhere. Waited until she realized her passport had mysteriously vanished from the office drawer where management insisted they kept employee documents safe. By then, nobody answered her calls anymore. Seoul became colder after that. Not physically. Emotionally. People stopped seeing her face and only saw inconvenience. Employers smiled politely until they realized her paperwork situation was complicated. Then their expressions changed instantly. Store owners watched her too closely. Train passengers avoided sitting beside her after hearing imperfect Korean leave her mouth. One man at a bus stop had looked directly at her backpack and asked if she was homeless. She lied and said no even though she had slept inside a 24-hour laundromat the night before. Imani stepped out of the shower slowly, wrapping herself in one of the white towels with careful hands like she was afraid to ruin it. The heated bathroom mirror slowly cleared, revealing the woman she had become after months of surviving instead of living. Yet tonight something felt different in a way she did not understand. Not because of the room. Not because of the food waiting downstairs. But because when Kwon Tae-suk looked at her inside that elevator, he had not looked disgusted. Curious maybe. Guarded certainly. But not disgusted. That alone felt unfamiliar enough to hurt. She finally sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the untouched pillow beside her. Then quietly, almost apologetically to the empty room itself, Imani whispered, "Just 1 week." As if saying it softly enough might stop hope from hearing her. By 6:30 the next morning, the entire penthouse staff already knew about the girl from the elevator. In buildings like this, silence traveled faster than gossip because people learned long ago that survival depended on noticing everything while pretending to notice nothing. Imani entered the kitchen quietly wearing one of the spare gray housekeeping uniforms left outside her room overnight. The sleeves were slightly too short, and the shoes pinched near her toes, but they were dry and clean. That alone felt like luxury. The kitchen itself glowed with soft morning light reflecting off polished steel counters and white marble surfaces. Coffee brewed somewhere nearby, rich and warm enough to make her stomach tighten painfully with hunger. Several staff members glanced toward her before quickly looking away again. Curious. Cautious. Measuring. Nobody smiled, but nobody looked cruel either. They simply looked confused. Because people like Kwon Tae-suk did not bring strangers upstairs. Ever. A middle-aged cook slid a bowl of rice porridge toward her without a word. Steam curled softly into the air. Imani blinked in surprise. "Thank you." The woman only nodded. once before returning to chopping vegetables with quiet efficiency. Imani sat carefully at the far corner of the staff table, posture straight despite exhaustion, eating slowly like someone trying to make the meal last longer than it could. Across the room, two younger employees whispered softly in Korean while stealing occasional glances toward her. She understood enough now to catch fragments. Foreigner. Elevator. Boss. Pretty. Dangerous. She kept her eyes lowered and continued eating. Invisible felt safer. Upstairs, 47 floors above the warmth of the kitchen, Tae-suk stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private office while Seoul awakened beneath a blanket of winter fog. Expensive buildings stretched endlessly across the skyline, cold and perfect against the pale morning light. His chief of security stood several feet behind him holding a tablet. "We investigated her," the man said carefully. Imani Bellamy. 27. Arrived from Chicago 8 months ago on a hospitality work visa. Tae-suk remained silent. The employment agency she worked for is under investigation for labor violations. Multiple workers disappeared from company housing over the past year. That made Tae-suk finally turn slightly. Disappeared? Not physically missing. They left. Most undocumented afterward. The security chief hesitated briefly before continuing. She filed complaints about unpaid wages 2 months ago. Nothing happened. Tae-suk took the tablet and scanned the grainy employee file photo attached to her records. In the picture, Imani stood in front of a plain white wall wearing a cheap black blazer, trying very hard to smile professionally despite visible exhaustion around her eyes. Something about the image unsettled him. She looked like someone fighting to remain respectable while the world slowly stripped the ability away from her piece by piece. Any criminal history? None. Debt? Minimal. Family? Mother deceased. Younger sister deceased 4 years ago. The room fell quiet again. Tae-suk handed the tablet back without expression. Continue monitoring the agency. The guard nodded once. And the girl? Tae-suk turned back toward the skyline. Down below, thousands of people moved through Seoul already carrying private grief no one else would ever notice. 1 week, he said calmly. After that, she chooses what happens next. Meanwhile downstairs, Imani had already finished eating and quietly washed not only her own dishes, but the entire sink full of breakfast pans nobody asked her to touch. She dried the counters afterward too, moving automatically from habit rather than obligation. The older kitchen cook watched silently from across the room before finally speaking. You do not have to work for food here. Imani paused with the dish towel still in her hands. Then softly, almost embarrassed, she answered, I know. But the truth was, she did not know how to exist anywhere without earning permission first. And somewhere above her, a man who had spent most of his life believing kindness was weakness found himself unable to stop thinking about that. 3 days passed before Tae-suk saw Imani again, but by then the entire building had already begun noticing her in ways neither of them expected. Not because she spoke loudly. Not because she asked for attention. Quite the opposite. She moved through the staff floors like someone terrified of becoming a burden. Quiet footsteps. Soft apologies. Careful hands that cleaned things nobody assigned her to touch. On the 4th morning, one of the younger laundry attendants arrived crying quietly after splitting the seam of her only winter coat while carrying supply boxes downstairs. The girl tried hiding the damage with tape before starting her shift. 2 hours later, she found the coat folded neatly beside the dryers with the seam repaired so perfectly it looked untouched. Nobody saw Imani do it. But everyone knew. The next evening, one of the kitchen boys accidentally dropped an entire tray of expensive porcelain bowls after slipping near the sink. The crash echoed through the kitchen hard enough to freeze every employee in place. Nobody spoke because everybody knew how costly those dishes were. Before panic could fully settle in, Imani knelt beside him first. Are you hurt? She asked softly while checking his shaking hands for cuts instead of yelling about the mess. The boy stared at her like he did not understand the question. Later that night, the older kitchen cook quietly noticed her skipping meat again during dinner service, pushing the larger portions toward the younger staff instead. "You do not like beef?" the woman asked. Imani smiled faintly. "I do." "Then why do you never take any?" Imani lowered her eyes toward the soup bowl in front of her. "Because I know what it feels like when there is not enough." The cook said nothing after that. But the next morning, an extra plate appeared beside Imani's breakfast tray anyway. Upstairs, Tae-suk listened silently while his security chief delivered routine reports over black coffee inside the private office. Financial negotiations. Shipping schedules. Political favors owed by men too wealthy to ever speak honestly in public. Yet somehow, between all of it, his attention drifted elsewhere. "The staff likes her," the chief mentioned casually while reviewing security footage timestamps. Tae-suk glanced up slightly. That was quick. "She repairs things." "Repairs?" "Uniforms. Broken cabinet hinges. Someone said she fixed the old kitchen radio too." The chief hesitated briefly before adding, "Nobody asked her to." Tae-suk leaned back slowly in his chair. Through the glass wall behind him, snow had begun falling over Seoul in soft white streaks. "And she still avoids the penthouse level?" "Completely." That answer interested him more than expected. Most people became curious around wealth. Especially his wealth. They stared too long at paintings worth millions. Took photos secretly. Tried asking questions about rumors surrounding his businesses. But Imani moved through the building like she wanted to disappear before anyone remembered she existed. That night, Tae-suk returned home later than usual after a dinner meeting near Gangnam. The penthouse stood silent except for the low jazz music drifting faintly from somewhere below the main staircase. He paused immediately. Nobody played music here. Ever. Following the sound quietly, he stopped near the entrance to the second-floor library. The door remained slightly open beneath warm amber light. Inside, Imani sat cross-legged on the floor beside a cleaning cart with an old maintenance radio resting near her knee. One small screwdriver remained tucked behind her ear while soft American jazz crackled gently through repaired speakers. She did not notice him standing there. Her attention stayed focused on polishing the wooden bookshelf edges with careful precision while humming quietly under her breath. It was the first time Tae-suk had seen her relaxed. No fear tightening her shoulders. No apology already waiting in her expression. Just a tired young woman softly singing to herself in a language nobody else in the building understood. Then the song ended abruptly in static. Imani sighed softly and tapped the side of the radio. "Come on," she murmured. "You survived this long. Do not quit on me now." Something unfamiliar pulled briefly at the corner of Tae-suk's mouth before disappearing again almost instantly. Because for reasons he could not explain yet, the sight of her trying to fix broken things felt strangely personal. The first time Tae-suk saw Imani smile, she did not know anyone was watching. Snow covered the rooftop garden in a thin layer of silver white by the time midnight settled over the penthouse tower. Seoul shimmered endlessly beyond the railing, neon lights glowing through the winter haze while distant traffic moved like rivers of gold beneath the dark sky. Tae-suk stepped out onto the rooftop terrace after finishing a tense phone call he no longer had patience for. Men kept talking to him about territory, contracts, influence. Everyone wanted something from him. Power made conversations exhausting because honesty disappeared the moment people became afraid of losing access to you. He loosened the collar of his black dress shirt slightly and exhaled into the freezing air. That was when he heard the sound. Soft laughter. Quiet enough to disappear beneath the wind if he had not been standing still already. Tae-suk frowned faintly and followed it toward the far corner of the rooftop garden where the maintenance greenhouse sat partially hidden beneath hanging ivy. The scene waiting there stopped him completely. Imani knelt on the snowy concrete. Near one of the heating vents wearing an oversized gray hoodie and wool gloves clearly borrowed from the staff laundry room. Curled beside her was a small orange stray cat with one damaged ear and snowflakes caught across its fur. Tae-suk had seen the animal before roaming around the underground parking entrance. Nobody could ever get close to it. Yet somehow the cat sat comfortably in Imani's lap while she carefully tore pieces from a warm bread roll wrapped in napkins beside her. "You are the grumpiest little man in Korea," she whispered softly while the cat ate from her gloved palm. "You know that?" The cat responded with a rough meow that made her laugh again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just genuine. Warm. The kind of laugh that escaped before sadness remembered to stop it. Tae-suk stayed completely still near the rooftop doorway, hands resting inside the pockets of his coat while snow drifted quietly between them. He had seen beautiful women before. Hundreds of them. Actresses. Models. Socialites trained to smile like luxury advertisements at charity galas and business dinners. But none of those smiles looked like this one. Because this smile expected nothing in return. Imani carefully adjusted the scarf around the cat's neck and shook her head softly. "You cannot survive winter out here alone." Her voice carried the gentle scolding tone of someone who had spent too much time trying to protect fragile things despite having no protection herself. The cat suddenly looked past her toward the doorway. Imani turned immediately, startled. The moment she saw Tae-suk standing there, the smile vanished from her face so quickly it almost hurt to witness. Her shoulders straightened automatically. Distance returned. "Sir." She stood up too fast, nearly dropping the bread bag into the snow. "I am sorry. I should not be up here." Tae-suk glanced toward the cat now weaving lazily around her legs without fear. "It trusts you." Imani looked down at the animal quietly. "I think it is just cold." Animals do not trust easily when they are cold. The words settled softly between them. Snowflakes melted against the dark wool of Tae-suk's coat while the city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. Imani lowered her gaze again first. She always did. "I was feeding him leftovers from the kitchen," she explained carefully. "I did not steal anything." Tae-suk almost found the statement absurd. In a building filled with people who lied professionally for a living, the only person apologizing was the woman feeding bread to a stray cat at midnight. His eyes shifted toward her gloves. Mismatched. One black. One navy blue. Both slightly too large for her hands. "You are freezing," he said. "I am okay." She was not. Her cheeks had turned pink from the wind, and even from several feet away he could see her fingers trembling slightly beneath the wool gloves. Without speaking further, Tae-suk stepped closer and removed the thick charcoal scarf from around his neck. Imani's eyes widened immediately. "Sir, you do not have to," but he had already draped the warm fabric carefully across her shoulders before she could finish the sentence. The movement was brief. Controlled. Yet impossibly gentle for a man the city whispered about with fear. Imani froze completely beneath the sudden warmth. Tae-suk stepped back almost immediately afterward like the moment had surprised him too. The rooftop fell silent except for distant wind sweeping across Seoul and the soft rumble of the city below. Then quietly, while snow continued falling around them, Tae-suk looked toward the stray cat still rubbing against Imani's boots and said, "It seems neither of you likes sleeping alone in the cold." The storm arrived just after midnight. Wind slammed against the glass walls of the penthouse tower hard enough to make even the steel window frames groan softly beneath the pressure. Snow mixed with freezing rain across Seoul while distant thunder rolled through the skyline in deep violent waves. By 1:30 in the morning, half the district had already lost power. The lights inside Tae-suk's building flickered once. Twice. Then everything went dark. For a moment, silence swallowed the entire tower. No music. No elevator hum. No soft machinery hidden behind luxury walls. Just darkness and the sound of winter raging outside. Emergency backup lights activated. Several seconds later, casting the hallways in dim amber shadows. Tae-suk stepped out of his office immediately, irritation already settling across his features. His security team moved quickly through the penthouse level checking generators and communication systems while staff members whispered nervously downstairs. The building had private backup power, but storms this severe sometimes disrupted the transition systems temporarily. "Sir, maintenance says full restoration may take an hour," one guard reported. Tae-suk nodded once, but before he could respond, another sound reached him faintly through the hallway. Something metallic hitting the floor below. Then breathing. Fast. Uneven. Panic breathing. Tae-suk turned immediately toward the staff corridor. The sound came again. He followed it without speaking, footsteps quiet against the dimly lit marble floor until he reached the laundry room near the west stairwell. The door stood partially open. Inside, Imani sat crouched tightly against the corner beside the washing machines, arms wrapped around herself so hard her knuckles looked pale beneath her dark skin. A basket of folded towels had tipped over beside her unnoticed. She did not even realize he entered the room. Her breathing came too fast, chest rising sharply while thunder shook the windows again overhead. Imani. The sound of her name made her flinch violently. Her eyes snapped upward in panic, unfocused at first before finally recognizing him standing there beneath the weak emergency lights. "I am sorry," she whispered instantly, voice shaking badly. "I dropped the towels. I was cleaning and the lights went out and Another crack of thunder split across the city outside. Imani froze completely. Tae-suk watched the color drain from her face as she instinctively pressed herself farther into the corner like someone bracing for something much worse than a storm. Then he understood. This was not fear of darkness. This was memory. "Look at me," he said quietly. She tried. But another loud sound echoed through the building as somewhere downstairs a metal door slammed shut from the wind. Imani gasped sharply and covered her ears immediately. Breathing spiraling faster. "No," she whispered under her breath. "No, no, no." Tae-suk crossed the room without hesitation this time. "Imani." Her entire body trembled hard enough now that she could barely seem to hear him. Tears burned down her cheeks despite how desperately she tried hiding them. "I cannot," she choked softly. "I cannot hear doors like that," the sentence shattered halfway through. Tae-suk knelt in front of her carefully, close enough to ground her without trapping her. "You are safe here." Another flash of lightning illuminated the laundry room windows bright white. Imani shut her eyes instantly. Without thinking further, Tae-suk removed his suit jacket and draped it gently around her shoulders the same way he had wrapped his scarf around her on the rooftop days earlier. The heavy warmth settled over her trembling frame. "Breathe slowly," he said quietly. "Calm. Steady. Nothing is going to happen to you tonight." Imani's breathing remained uneven at first, but her hands slowly loosened from around her ears as his voice cut through the panic surrounding her. Tae-suk stayed exactly where he was despite the cold tile floor beneath his knees and the dozens of calls likely waiting for him upstairs. Because somehow the sight of this woman trying desperately to stay silent even while breaking apart felt unbearable to him in a way he could not explain. Minutes passed before Imani finally looked at him again through tear-filled eyes. Embarrassment flooded her expression immediately afterward. "I am sorry," she whispered again, ashamed of the tears now staining her face. Tae-suk stared at her for one long silent moment beneath the dim emergency lights. Then quietly, almost painfully gentle for a man like him, he said, "You apologize too much for someone who survived this much alone." The storm finally passed just before dawn, leaving Seoul wrapped in cold silver fog and rainwater that streaked softly across the towering glass windows of the penthouse. By morning, the building had returned to its usual rhythm. Elevators hummed again. Staff members moved quietly through polished hallways carrying trays, linens, schedules, secrets. Everything looked normal. But something between Tae-suk and Imani had shifted inside that laundry room during the blackout, and both of them felt it without knowing what to call it yet. Imani avoided him for most of the day afterward. Not intentionally. At least that was what she kept telling herself every time she changed direction after hearing his footsteps somewhere nearby. Shame still lingered heavily in her chest from the panic attack. She had spent years learning how to survive quietly, how to fall apart in private places where nobody could witness weakness and attach consequences to it later. Yet Tae-suk had seen everything. The trembling. The tears. The fear she worked so hard to bury beneath politeness and silence. Worse somehow, he had stayed. By evening, snow had started falling again in slow soft waves outside the penthouse windows. Imani sat alone in the small sewing room near the laundry corridor repairing loose buttons on staff uniforms while the old radio beside her played low jazz through occasional static. Her fingers moved automatically through fabric and thread, steady now. Controlled. Safe. Or at least pretending to be. The door opened quietly behind her. She looked up immediately and froze when she saw Tae-suk standing there without his usual security detail. He wore a black cashmere sweater instead of a suit tonight, the softer clothing somehow making him look younger and more tired at the same time. "You missed dinner," he said. Not accusing. Just observant. Imani lowered her eyes back toward the uniform in her lap. "I was not hungry." Tae-suk glanced briefly toward the untouched tea sitting beside her sewing kit. "Cold already." "That is a lie." The directness caught her off guard enough to almost smile despite herself. Almost. Silence settled between them while snow continued drifting beyond the narrow windows. Then Tae-suk noticed the way her hand paused slightly while pulling thread through the needle. Not fear this time. Pain. Your wrist. Imani instinctively covered it with her sleeve too late. Tae-suk stepped closer before she could hide it fully. A faint scar curved along the inside of her wrist, disappearing beneath the cuff of her sweater. Old. Pale. But deep enough to tell its own story. His eyes lifted slowly toward her face. What happened? Imani went very still. For several seconds, only the soft crackle of the radio filled the room. Then quietly, without looking at him, she answered, "Some jobs are dangerous when people know you have nowhere else to go." Tae-suk's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. Imani swallowed once before continuing, voice calm in the unnatural way people sound when discussing memories they survived instead of healed from. "The hotel manager who hired foreign workers used to remind us that we were replaceable. Especially women without family nearby." Her fingers tightened around the fabric in her lap. "One night I refused to stay after my shift alone with him." She stopped there. She did not need to explain further. The silence afterward felt heavier than any detailed story could have created. Tae-suk stared at the faint scar disappearing beneath her sleeve, jaw tightening slowly. Something cold moved behind his eyes now. Not pity. Anger. The dangerous kind that became quieter instead of louder. Imani noticed the shift immediately and shook her head softly. "Please do not look at me like that." His gaze returned to her face. "Like what?" "Like something terrible happened to me." Her voice lowered further. "People survive worse every day." Tae-suk remained silent for a long moment while snow tapped softly against the windows behind him. Then finally he asked, almost carefully, "And who taught you that surviving should make your pain smaller?" The question hit harder than she expected. Imani looked down immediately, blinking too fast now as emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Nobody had ever asked her that before. Not once. Most people only cared whether survivors could continue functioning without becoming inconvenient. Tae-suk took one slow step closer, his voice quieter now. "What happened to you was wrong." Simple words. Direct. Certain. Yet hearing them spoken aloud made something inside Imani tremble far more dangerously than fear ever had. After that night in the sewing room, something dangerous began growing inside Kwon Tae-suk, and for the first time in years, it had nothing to do with business. He stopped sleeping properly. Not because of threats. Not because rival organizations kept pushing against his territory near Busan. Those problems had always existed. No, this felt different. Quieter. Colder. Every time he closed his eyes, He kept seeing Imani sitting beneath the dim laundry room lights apologizing for scars that should never have existed in the first place. Seoul woke beneath pale winter sunlight the next morning while Tae-suk sat alone inside his private office reviewing files spread across the black marble desk. Except none of the documents in front of him concerned shipping contracts anymore. Every page contained information about the labor agency that brought Imani to Korea. Names, addresses, financial records, employee complaints buried beneath legal paperwork designed to disappear quietly. His security chief stood nearby in tense silence. The agency owner has connections, he explained carefully. Not major ones, but enough protection to avoid investigation. Tae-suk continued reading without expression. Protection from who? The man hesitated briefly. Assemblyman Choi's network. That answer darkened the room instantly. Choi handled business interests for several wealthy investors tied indirectly to Tae-suk's rivals. Corrupt men hiding behind clean suits and political smiles while vulnerable workers carried the cost of their greed quietly beneath the surface. Tae-suk's eyes lowered toward another photograph paperclipped inside the report. 3 foreign women standing outside employee housing during winter. Thin jackets. Exhausted faces. One of them was Imani. Even in the picture, she looked tired enough to disappear. How many complaints? He asked quietly. 27 formal reports over 2 years. And nobody acted? The workers were undocumented by then. Most became afraid to testify. Silence filled the office. The kind of silence every man around Tae-suk had learned to fear more than shouting. Because anger from men like him did not arrive loudly. It arrived carefully. Controlled. Shut the agency down, Tae-suk said finally. The security chief blinked once. Sir? Tae-suk looked up slowly, dark eyes colder now than the Seoul winter outside the windows. Every property connected to them. Every contract. Every account moving money through Choi's network. That could create political complications. Tae-suk leaned back slightly in his chair. Then let them become complicated. Downstairs, completely unaware of the storm beginning around her, Imani folded fresh towels inside the spa-level storage room while soft jazz played quietly from the repaired radio clipped to her cleaning cart. She had started smiling more now. Small smiles. Careful ones that disappeared quickly whenever she noticed someone watching. But the staff noticed anyway. Especially Mrs. Han, the older kitchen cook who had spent 20 years working inside Tae-suk's buildings and had never once seen him pause beside the staff elevators before now. Yet twice this week, she caught him standing silently near the lower hallway while Imani worked nearby completely unaware. Men like Tae-suk did not watch people unless they mattered. Late that afternoon, one of the younger housekeepers rushed into the laundry room holding her phone nervously. Did you see this? She asked in Korean before switching awkwardly into English for Imani. A labor company got raided today. Imani frowned slightly. What company? The girl showed her the screen. The name hit Imani like ice water. Her former agency. The article reported frozen accounts, labor violations, illegal passport retention, employee exploitation investigations spreading across multiple districts. Imani stared silently at the phone while her heartbeat slowly lost rhythm inside her chest. That was your company? The girl asked softly. Imani nodded once, unable to speak immediately. Because deep down, she already knew this was not coincidence. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the laundry cart. Upstairs, several floors above her, Tae-suk stood near the penthouse windows with one hand resting inside his pocket while snow drifted softly across the skyline again. His phone buzzed with angry messages from politicians and businessmen already demanding explanations. He ignored every single one. Because somewhere along the way, protecting Imani Bellamy had stopped feeling like charity. And started feeling personal. The gala began at 7 o'clock sharp beneath crystal chandeliers and soft gold lighting high above the Han River, where Seoul's wealthiest families gathered pretending elegance erased cruelty. Women draped in designer gowns moved through the ballroom carrying champagne glasses worth more than most people's weekly salaries. Men in tailored suits discussed investments and politics while smiling carefully enough to hide the greed underneath. Everything shimmered. Everything lied. Tae-suk stood near the center of it all in a perfectly fitted black tuxedo, calm and unreadable as always while powerful men approached him one after another offering polite congratulations for business victories they secretly resented. His presence alone controlled the room. Nobody raised their voice near him. Nobody interrupted him. Fear had polished itself into respect years ago. Yet despite the luxury surrounding him, Tae-suk's attention kept drifting elsewhere tonight. Toward the service entrance near the ballroom hallway where staff members quietly moved in and out carrying trays beneath invisible pressure. Toward one person specifically. Imani had not wanted to attend the gala at all. She spent almost 20 minutes insisting to Mrs. Han that someone else should help with the upstairs service rotation instead. "I do not belong around people like that," she whispered nervously while adjusting the sleeves of the formal black uniform provided for the event. Mrs. Han only looked at her carefully before replying, "None of them belong there either. They just have money." But now, standing near the ballroom entrance balancing a silver tray of champagne glasses in gloved hands, Imani felt every inch of difference between herself and the glittering world around her. Conversations paused when people noticed her. Not openly. Just subtle enough to wound quietly. Curious stares lingered slightly too long against her dark skin and American accent whenever she answered politely in Korean or English. She kept her posture straight anyway. Calm. Invisible. Safe. Across the ballroom, Tae-suk noticed all of it. Then came Seo Hye-rin. Beautiful. Wealthy. Born into one of Seoul's most influential families. She approached Tae-suk with practiced confidence and a smile sharp enough to cut silk. Rumors had linked their families together for years despite Tae-suk showing absolutely no interest in encouraging them. "You disappeared after the labor investigation," Hye-rin said lightly while accepting champagne from a passing tray. "People are starting to think you developed a conscience." Tae-suk barely reacted. That would disappoint many investors. She laughed softly before her eyes shifted past him toward the staff lying near the ballroom entrance. More specifically, toward Imani. Something cold entered her expression immediately. "Interesting choice of staff tonight," she remarked casually. Tae-suk followed her gaze without speaking. Imani lowered her eyes the moment she realized they were looking toward her. Hye-rin tilted her head slightly. "The foreign girl from your building, right?" Silence. "I heard she was sleeping in your elevator before you took her in." Her voice remained smooth enough that nearby guests pretended not to hear. "Very charitable of you." Tae-suk's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Hye-rin continued anyway. "Honestly, these situations always become messy. People like that get attached quickly once they realize luxury feels better than survival." The words landed quietly. Cruelly. Imani heard every single one from across the room despite pretending to focus on the champagne tray in her trembling hands. Her face remained calm, but embarrassment burned beneath her skin hard enough to make breathing difficult. Hye-rin noticed the reaction and smiled faintly. "Although I suppose even elevator strays eventually find warm places to sleep." The ballroom fell silent. Not completely. Just enough. Enough for nearby conversations to pause beneath the weight of what she had said. Imani looked down immediately, shoulders stiffening while humiliation spread quietly across her face. Then came the sound of crystal touching marble. Tae-suk had set his champagne glass down. Slowly. Deliberately. Every eye in the ballroom shifted toward him instantly because men like Kwon Tae-suk did not move carelessly. He turned fully toward Hye-rin now, expression calm in the terrifying way storms looked calm before destruction. "You should be careful," he said softly. Hye-rin blinked once. "Excuse me?" Tae-suk's dark eyes shifted briefly toward Imani standing frozen near the ballroom entrance before returning to Hye-rin again. The woman you just insulted, he said quietly, has shown more dignity in 1 month than most people in this room have shown their entire lives. Silence crashed through the ballroom. Absolute. Brutal. Hiren's smile disappeared instantly. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loudly enough to interrupt the moment. Then Tae-suk stepped away from her completely and crossed the ballroom floor toward Imani instead. Hundreds of eyes followed him. Imani stood frozen beside the service table, fingers tightening around the silver tray while disbelief slowly filled her expression. Tae-suk stopped directly in front of her beneath the crystal lights, his voice calm enough for the entire room to hear. "You do not lower your head for anyone here," he said. And somehow, for the first time in years, Imani Bellamy actually believed him. The ballroom never fully recovered after Tae-suk crossed the floor to stand beside Imani. Conversations returned eventually, but softer now. Careful. Like everyone suddenly realized the invisible line between power and humiliation had shifted without warning. Nobody approached Imani again for the rest of the evening. Not because they respected her. Because they respected him. And somehow that hurt almost as much. Imani remained near the service corridor after the gala ended, quietly helping the catering staff collect empty glasses while the final guests disappeared into waiting black cars beneath the falling snow outside. Midnight had already passed when the ballroom lights dimmed low enough for exhaustion to settle across the workers' faces. Yet despite everything that happened earlier, Imani still moved carefully around the room like she was afraid to touch things she could not afford. Mrs. Han eventually placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Go. Upstairs," she said softly. "You have done enough tonight." Imani nodded automatically, but her chest still felt tight beneath the neatly pressed black uniform. Because no matter how many times she replayed the moment in her head, she still could not understand why Tae-suk defended her publicly like that. Men with power usually protected reputation first. Not people. Especially not women like her. The private elevator ride to the penthouse level felt strangely quiet. The same mirrored walls. The same polished marble floors she once slept on while trying not to freeze during a Seoul winter night. Yet now her reflection looked different somehow. Not healed. Not safe. Just seen. And that terrified her more than invisibility ever did. The elevator doors opened softly onto the dark penthouse hallway. Most lights had already been turned off except for the warm glow spilling faintly from Tae-suk's office near the windows. Imani froze when she realized he was still awake. She should have walked away immediately. Instead, her feet carried her forward before fear could stop them. Tae-suk stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, one hand resting loosely inside his pocket while snow drifted quietly beyond the glass. He had removed the tuxedo jacket hours ago. The sleeves of his white dress shirt remained rolled neatly to his forearms, exposing the dark ink tattoos curling beneath expensive fabric and tired skin. He looked exhausted. Human. Not like the untouchable man the ballroom feared downstairs. Tae-suk noticed her reflection in the window before turning fully around. "You should be sleeping," he said quietly. Imani clasped her hands together nervously. "I wanted to thank you." His expression remained unreadable. "For what?" The question caught her off guard. "For tonight." Tae-suk studied her silently for a moment before answering. "I did not defend you because you needed saving." Imani blinked softly. "Then why?" He looked toward the city lights briefly before speaking again. "Because she was wrong. Simple. Direct. Certain." The words settled deeply inside her chest in ways she could not explain. Imani lowered her eyes immediately before emotion could fully reach the surface. "Nobody has ever done that for me before." Her voice came out smaller than intended. Tae-suk's gaze returned to her face slowly. "Defended you?" Imani nodded once. "Stayed on my side." Silence filled the room afterward. Heavy. Honest. Somewhere below them, Seoul continued moving through the night completely unaware that one exhausted woman had just admitted something far more vulnerable than fear. Taesuk stepped closer then. Not enough to intimidate. Just enough that she no longer felt alone standing there beneath the soft amber lights. People failed you, he said quietly. Imani swallowed hard. Maybe I just expected too little from them. Taesuk's jaw tightened slightly at that answer. Because he recognized it. The quiet resignation. The kind built after disappointment repeats itself long enough to feel normal. Imani looked down toward her trembling hands before speaking again. You should not have embarrassed someone important because of me tonight. Taesuk's eyes darkened faintly. Do you know what weak people do when they gain power? She shook her head slowly. They protect status. His voice lowered further now. Strong people protect others. The room fell completely silent after that. Imani stared at him for several long seconds while emotion slowly filled her eyes again despite how hard she tried stopping it. Not dramatic tears. Just the quiet kind that appear when kindness reaches someone who stopped expecting it long ago. Taesuk noticed immediately. Yet unlike everyone else in her life, he did not ask her to stop crying. He simply stayed there beside her while snow continued falling softly across Seoul outside the windows. 3 days after the gala, Imani packed her belongings before sunrise. The decision came quietly, the same way most painful decisions entered her life. No arguments. No dramatic goodbye. Just a folded gray sweater placed carefully into her worn backpack while the rest of the penthouse still slept beneath the soft blue darkness before morning. She stood inside the small staff room for several long seconds after finishing, eyes lingering on the neatly made bed near the window. The room no longer looked temporary anymore. That frightened her. Because comfort had a dangerous way of making people forget how quickly they could lose everything. And lately, every moment around Taesuk had started feeling too warm to survive losing. Imani slipped his charcoal scarf from the hook near the door and folded it carefully on the pillow before leaving. Her fingers rested against the fabric for one quiet second longer than necessary. Then she walked away. Outside the staff hallway windows, snow drifted softly across Seoul again. The city looked peaceful from 40 stories above the streets. Almost kind. Imani moved silently through the corridor carrying her backpack against her chest while memories followed behind her with every step. The first bowl of hot rice porridge in the kitchen. The rooftop cat curling beside her boots. Taesuk kneeling beside her during the blackout while she shook apart in the dark. No one had ever stayed through the difficult parts of her before. People usually preferred survivors after they looked healed. But somewhere between the storm and the gala ballroom, she had started wanting things she could not afford emotionally. Safety. Belonging. Him. And that made leaving necessary. The elevator doors opened with a soft familiar chime. The same elevator where Taesuk found her sleeping weeks earlier. Imani stepped inside slowly and pressed the lobby button. The doors almost closed completely before a hand stopped them. Her breath caught instantly. Taesuk entered the elevator wearing a black wool coat over dark slacks, snowflakes melting slowly against his shoulders from outside. He looked like he had not slept. His eyes dropped immediately toward the backpack clutched tightly in her hands. Silence filled the elevator. Heavy. Sharp enough to cut through the quiet mechanical hum surrounding them. You are leaving. It was not a question. Imani lowered her eyes. I stayed longer than I was supposed to. Taesuk pressed the emergency stop button without looking away from her. The elevator halted smoothly between floors. Imani blinked in surprise. Sir, do not call me that right now. His voice remained calm, but something underneath it felt dangerously restrained. Imani tightened her grip on the backpack straps. People are talking because of me now. The gala made everything worse for you. Taesuk stared at her for several long seconds. You think I care about gossip? I think powerful men eventually regret complicated women. The honesty in her voice hurt more than accusation would have. Taesuk's jaw tightened faintly. Is that what you believe you are? Imani looked away toward the mirrored elevator wall instead of answering. Because yes. She had spent years becoming the kind of person people described as complicated once survival stopped looking graceful enough for their comfort. Tae-suk stepped closer then. Not aggressively. Not enough to frighten her. Just close enough that his voice no longer needed distance. Look at me. Slowly, Imani obeyed. The expression on his face nearly unraveled her completely. Not anger. Not pity. Something far more dangerous. Concern without conditions. You think leaving protects me, he said quietly. Imani swallowed hard. Does it not? Tae-suk looked at her backpack briefly before reaching forward and gently taking the strap from her trembling hand. The movement was slow enough to let her pull away if she wanted. She did not. No, he answered softly. It protects you from believing someone might actually stay. The words landed directly against every frightened place inside her chest. Imani blinked too quickly now, emotion threatening to spill over again while the elevator remained suspended silently between floors and worlds. Tae-suk still held the backpack strap loosely between his fingers. I told you once that strong people protect others, he said quietly. I meant it. His hand shifted slightly then, brushing against hers for the briefest moment. Warm. Steady. Real. Stay because you want to, he said. Not because you owe me gratitude. And not because you are afraid to be cared for. The elevator remained perfectly still afterward. No city noise. No voices. Just the soft sound of two people standing impossibly close while years of loneliness slowly cracked open between them. 6 months later, the elevator doors opened at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, and for the first time in her life, Imani Bellamy stepped inside without fear. Sunlight poured through the glass walls of the penthouse tower, turning the marble floors gold while Seoul stretched endlessly beneath the clear spring sky. The city no longer looked cold from up here. Busy, yes. Loud. Imperfect. But no longer cold. Imani adjusted the cream-colored coat folded neatly over her arm and smiled softly toward the receptionist downstairs before stepping into the private elevator she once used as shelter during the worst night of her life. The mirrored walls reflected a woman who looked different now. Stronger somehow. Not because pain disappeared. Some wounds never fully left. But because she no longer carried shame for surviving them. The elevator rose smoothly through the building while soft jazz played quietly through hidden speakers overhead. The same old radio from the sewing room now sat permanently inside the women's center 3 blocks away, where music drifted through warm hallways filled with people rebuilding their lives one careful day at a time. The center had started small. Just 6 rooms above an abandoned restaurant Tae-suk quietly purchased without explaining why. Now it housed immigrant women escaping exploitation, unpaid labor situations, and homelessness across Seoul. Language classes operated every Tuesday night. Legal volunteers visited twice a month. Hot meals stayed available 24 hours a day because Imani insisted nobody should ever have to earn the right to eat safely. The women there trusted her because she never spoke down to them. She understood humiliation too personally for that. Miss Bellamy, the donations from Busan arrived this morning, one volunteer had told her earlier while carrying supply boxes through the center hallway. Imani smiled softly at the memory. Nobody called her homeless anymore. Nobody looked at her like a burden needing temporary kindness. She had become something far more dangerous to hopelessness than pity. She became proof. The elevator chimed gently as it reached the top floor. The doors slid open slowly onto the quiet penthouse hallway where everything first changed. Same marble floors. Same warm amber lighting. Same silence expensive buildings always carried. Yet now the space felt familiar instead of untouchable. Imani stepped forward, heels clicking softly against the floor while distant city lights spilled through the windows ahead. Tae-suk stood near the kitchen island pouring coffee into 2 cups before she even reached him. He no longer looked surprised whenever she arrived unannounced. Somewhere along the way, her presence had woven itself naturally into the rhythm of his life. Black dress shirt. Sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. dark hair slightly messy like he had been awake too long again. Powerful men usually carried themselves like the world belonged to them. Tae-suk carried himself like someone perpetually waiting for threats. Except around her. Around her, something quieter existed beneath all the steel. He looked up the moment he heard her footsteps. "You are late," he said calmly. Imani smiled while setting her folder onto the counter beside him. One of the new girls burned the pancakes. Tae-suk handed her a coffee cup already prepared exactly the way she liked it. And apparently I am now responsible for teaching basic cooking classes. A small laugh escaped him before he could stop it fully. Rare. Low. Real. Imani noticed immediately because she always noticed things nobody else did about him. The dangerous silences. The exhaustion behind his eyes. The way he relaxed only after hearing her voice enter a room. Tae-suk leaned lightly against the counter watching her remove her coat while morning sunlight wrapped softly around the penthouse windows behind them. "Mrs. Han says the rooftop cat gained weight again," he said. Imani gasped softly in mock offense. "That is because you keep secretly feeding him expensive tuna. He has standards now." She laughed quietly, shaking her head while warmth settled naturally between them like it had always belonged there. No grand confession followed. No dramatic declaration. People like them understood love differently. Through consistency. Through staying. Through remembering how someone takes their coffee after surviving every reason to leave. The elevator chimed softly again somewhere down the hallway. Both of them glanced instinctively toward the sound before their eyes met once more. The same elevator that once hid her from the freezing Seoul winter had become the place where she first learned safety could exist without conditions. Tae-suk stepped closer then, reaching gently for the scarf wrapped loosely around her neck before adjusting it more securely against the spring breeze drifting through the slightly open balcony doors. His fingers lingered for one quiet second near her cheek. Warm. Certain. Home. Imani looked up at him beneath the morning light, emotion softening her expression in ways words could never fully hold. Because after everything the world had tried to take from her, one impossible truth still remained standing. The most feared man in Seoul had looked at a homeless woman sleeping in his elevator and seen someone worth protecting. And somehow, somewhere between winter storms and quiet acts of kindness, they both finally learned what dignity was supposed to feel like.